Hi everyone, welcome to this Grantsmanship Seminar with Queen Mary and LIDC. My name is Gun, I'm a Communications Manager at LIDC. I'll just talk a bit about housekeeping before Sharon starts. I would ask you to please keep your microphones muted during the presentations and only unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. If you want to indicate that you want have something to say, you can raise your hand and I will sort of monitor the participant list and then we'll give you the chance to ask your question. And you can also use the chat function if there's anything you want to say. And yeah, this event is being recorded just for your information. And yeah, I think that was all from me for now. So I will hand over to Sharon.
Great, welcome everybody, and I must remember to unmute and mute at the appropriate time. So as we'd hoped to have been able to welcome you onto Queen Mary campus, but that's not been possible for obvious reasons. I think the technology is holding up really well, so well done Gun and Alicia for kind of managing all of that. So you've got a packed few hours over the next I think we're due to finish around 12:45 or so. We've got a number of excellent speakers. On behalf of Queen Mary, I just want to introduce myself. So I'm Sharon Ellis, I'm Director of Research and Business Development at Queen Mary. Prior to coming here, I was the Director of International Science and Innovation in BAYS, so I have had quite a lot to do with overseas development assistance and kind of grants and all of that kind of good stuff. So if there's anything I helpfully can contribute, as well as trying to introduce this session, I absolutely will do. You're going to hear today from other colleagues with absolutely great experience in these areas. So we've got Professor Claire Heffernan, who will join us in 10-15 minutes or so. She's the director of the LIDC and a principal investigator on GCRF action hubs. She's done a lot of work focusing on interdisciplinary research at a variety of institutions and a huge range of kind of research interests. So she's going to share with us her experience of the kind of interdisciplinary research and tips for funding. Anna is going to, so Anna Antunes Martens is the Research Program Manager in International Development at LIDC. She's going to share with us her thoughts in terms of the funding landscape that's out there, funding opportunities, and a kind of question and answer from you in terms of tips and other ways of kind of honing your grant writing. Then we've got Luke Cridland, who's an Impact Engagement Officer at Queen Mary. Luke's been doing a huge amount of work for us in relation to ref returns, the impact case studies, how do we help train academics and early career researchers in that. And Luke's got a background in scientific publishing. So I think we've got a bunch of people with us this morning that have real skills and expertise and are very happy to share that with you. I would encourage you to think about, as you're going through this, what you want to get out of the session. And as Gun says, if there are particular things that you want to get out of this session, either raise your hand or write it in the chat so presenters can make sure that they try and cover your questions as we go through. I wasn't going to say much more beyond give my sort of take on a kind of the research landscape from my perspective, somebody fairly recently coming into the sector. I think, you know, huge amounts of investment have been put in over the last particularly 4-5 years in the UK, trying to bring us up to OECD averages. It's clear that the drive for multidisciplinary research, interdisciplinarity is definitely, I think that this is here to stay, and kind of tips for encouraging those disciplines to kind of work together and how do you get different people from different ideas would be really welcome from this particular session. I think the COVID-19 situation will present some opportunities. It will also, I think, mean some adjustments, certainly in the UK landscape. I think from the LIDC perspective, I don't see a particular kind of rowback from wanting to continue kind of, the kind of overseas development research angles. I don't see a rowing back from wanting to, collaborate, participate with international partners in that regard. I do think we might see some challenges in relation to funding in particular charity sectors. But I do think that from the UK perspective, we will carry on wanting to collaborate. We will carry on wanting to kind of drive that multidisciplinary work. We will want to carry on driving that working with international partners. So whilst it might feel a bit strange and a bit weird at this point in time, I certainly don't see that the landscape in front of us is that gloomy. I think the opportunities will still be here. I think that will be incredibly competitive. So tools and tips are always good under those circumstances. And I hope everybody has a kind of productive and enjoyable session over the next hour and a half. So I was going to leave it there and kind of hand over to Gun and Anna to kind of lead us through the next bit of the agenda. I'll try and sum up thoughts and ideas and next steps when we get to the end of it, and happily chip in if I've got things I can help with. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can see my screen. Can you please nod or... Yeah, cool. Thank you very much. So as Sharon said, I'm Anna. I'm the Research Program Manager at LIDC. And before we delve into the grantmanship proper, I just wanted to give you a very brief introduction for those of you who don't know what LIDC is and what you do and what we do. So LIDC is the London International Development Centre. We are a consortium of 7 University of London institutions, including QMUL, and the remaining ones are listed in this slide. We are a membership organisation, so besides our institutional members, we have their staff, students and alumni that are individual members too. And we also have members in national and international NGOs. Our remit is to facilitate interdisciplinary research, training, and events to tackle complex development challenges. And here is just a brief excerpt from our mission statement, and this follows nicely from Sharon's introduction. We work into the interdisciplinary space. We aim to provide groundbreaking solutions underpinned by world-leading research that is also disruptive. So we're not afraid of challenges, and we're not afraid of changing research paradigms to really get to the bottom of the problems and find solutions that benefit the most vulnerable. So as I mentioned, we have different levels of individual membership. We have student members, we have NGO members, and we have staff members. Because of the purpose of the talk today, I'll focus on the benefits for the staff members for LIDC. So if you join us as a staff member, that's entirely free. If you're affiliated with QMUL or any of our member institutions, it's a very easy process. You go on our website and join us. That will give you access to research opportunities, and I'll discuss those a little bit later after the grantmanship introduction. You can join our communities of practice, so our fora for discussion of important complex development problems. You get free entry to a number of LIDC events, and we have a very rich portfolio of events. I'll introduce some in a minute. You'll also receive a monthly customized newsletter, and you have the opportunity to blog for LIDC if you're interested in doing so. So starting off with our research themes, our research themes are very impact driven. They want to have an innovation slant, and they also have an angle of providing resilience and risk measurements. Our research themes are very broad and very much aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals and the complex challenges that are facing society globally, especially those in low and middle income countries. So we have work in the area of climate, education, food, health, migration, poverty, and inequality. And I don't have the time to take you through every single project we have in the past or currently active, but I would like to highlight, as Sharon mentioned, one of the UKRI research hubs that is our current flagship project at LIDC and is led by the director of LIDC, Professor Claire Heffernan, who's joining us later. This is a very large project. It's nearly 20 million funding from GCRF. Partner countries and countries of focus are Senegal, Indonesia, and India. It aims to transform research on child stunting by using a whole child approach, which consists of a very holistic approach that considers malnutrition as a problem that is not only the biology, is not only the access to food, it's also the food markets, it's education, it's a number of other socioeconomic factors. So it really appreciates malnutrition and childhood stunting as a multidimensional problem and tries to tackle it from different angles. If you wish to have more information on this, the link to the Action Against Stunting Hub is at the bottom of this slide. We also encourage and foster communities of practice, and our communities of practice are open fora for discussion of complex development challenges, but also of possible solutions. These are very intersectoral. They have stakeholders from various walks of life, from our academic partners, national and internationally, local and international NGOs, multilateral agencies, local policymakers and other stakeholders and research funders. And I would like just to highlight a recent community practice event we held on an area that is very dear to LIDC, which is childhood development and child resilience. This particular community of practice event had a focus on challenges in education in conflict and crisis settings. So how quality education can be delivered to children in refugee camps or children that are displaced in general. This was a very successful event that had participation from our academic members, but we also had the International Committee of the Red Cross, Plan International, and Queen Mary Foundation sharing their experience of working in the field of humanitarian aid. We had multilateral agencies like UNICEF, UNESCO, the World Bank, and the World Food Programme, also explaining their policies and their upcoming plans in this area. We had local policymakers and stakeholders, and we had GCRF challenge leaders as well. So this was a very productive event, and more events of this nature will follow. Of course, the objectives of these communities of practice are not only to foster discussion and encourage debate, which is of course very important, but also ultimately we hope to be able to foster research partnerships that are ready and ripe to respond to funding opportunities should such opportunities arise. This is just some pictures of events that were led and held by LIDC. For example, at the bottom of the page, a parliamentary event on childhood stunting, a hackathon held with the UCL Global Development Programme on challenges of the SDGs and the future of the SDGs. And here is a list of other events that have taken place recently. So we've run a very rich set of events, especially since the lockdown. Every week or every 2 weeks, we have various events. At the moment, they're predominantly focused on COVID-19 and its impacts on international development, but we also plan to run other events. So if you sign up to the LIDC website, you will receive alerts on when these events take place, and you're very welcome to join. And here's a list of upcoming events. Finally, blogging for LIDC. So we have a blog as part of our website, and all our members, be they students, staff, or alumni, are very welcome to suggest ideas for a blog in topics that they feel are of relevance to international development and to LIDC work. And our communication team will be very happy to help you produce such blog and support you with regards to content and format. So please get in touch with us if you're interested in doing so. And finally, you get access to our newsletter that is customized for the different members. So for example, here there's an example of the student and alumni newsletter, but there is a dedicated newsletter for staff as well that includes funding opportunities, job advertisements, all sorts of other important things in this area. So if anyone has any questions on LIDC, I'll be very happy to take those.
If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand or unmute yourself and you can ask the question to Anna. If you want to join, you can go to our website, lidc.ac.uk/join, where you find out more about how to join and what the benefits are. No one's raised their hand yet, so I think maybe, Anna, you want to go to the second part of your presentation, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, so the second part of my presentation is to give you a little bit of the LIDC take on the UK research funding landscape, and then talk a little bit about the inevitable, the number of funding opportunities that have arisen at the time of COVID-19. This is, of course, not a completely comprehensive or exhaustive presentation. I will have left out many funders, and I will have left out some important funding opportunities too, but I hope this will give you some clues as where to look and potentially how to develop your proposals a little bit. So as I mentioned, first I'll talk about UK funding landscape, then I'll give you some hints and tips on choosing a funding stream and considerations you have to have even before you start preparing an application, just making sure you find the right type of funding that is correct for your research proposal and also for your career stage. Then I'll list some funding opportunities in COVID-19 related research that have recently emerged. And then I'll just mention briefly how best QMUL researchers can engage with LIDC in terms of involvement in research proposals. So the UK funding landscape, I'll focus my presentation mostly on UKRI and public funders. This has partly to do because they are probably the most prolific funders in the country, and they have a very broad remit, but of course there are other funders, and I wanted to highlight that. As you may know, UKRI resulted from the merge of the research councils in 2018, and under this new umbrella organization, the idea was to have a more unified strategy for research and innovation in the UK. Other public funders, in addition to UKRI, are, for example, the National Institute for Health Research, the Academy of Medical Sciences, Royal Society, British Academy, amongst others. And there are, of course, research funding charities. Perhaps the biggest one is the Wellcome Trust. There are some important ones in the medical sphere, such as Cancer Research UK or the British Heart Foundation, but there are, of course, many other charities, and I would invite you to visit the Charity Commission website if you wish to know more. So as Sharon introduced, the UKRI vision reflects a vision for the society for the 21st century, and how research should really be working towards solving the problems of society with engagement of the public. These are some excerpts from the UKRI vision statement. I just wanted to highlight that this boils down to recognizing the complex challenges facing all societies need solutions, and the problems are very complex, therefore they require interdisciplinary approaches. It's also important for academia to speak to businesses, as economic growth depends on these, on strong bonds between the two sectors. Research is global, and its important problems are always much more than national. So it is important that there is an engagement and an openness to engage globally. And finally, that social media has changed the way people share their opinions and the nature of discussion, and engagement with the public is very important if we want to make sure research will generate benefits for everyone. So as I said, there are two main things that stand out to me from the vision statement. One is that research has to be challenge-led and solution-focused, hence interdisciplinary, and this relies on interdisciplinary partnerships and strong stakeholder engagement. And Claire, who's going to be speaking after me, will really focus on interdisciplinarity. I just wanted to mention quickly that if we think of challenge-driven research, we should be thinking of the Sustainable Development Goals and how research should be aligned with those. That they have the Sustainable Development Goals have very ambitious targets. I think it's fair to say that we're not doing great reaching such targets, and that we really need to think of ways that research can work towards providing solutions in all these areas. In terms of partnerships, the benefits of partnerships are obvious. There is a need for academia to work with industry, business, and the wider stakeholder community, especially the local beneficiaries. This is beneficial from a point of view of research development, because priority setting is done jointly with the perspectives of everyone involved, and can also enhance the likelihood of impact and proper research uptake. So this is really, really important, and this is at the heart of LIDC and the way we work with our stakeholders. So in response to this vision, UKRI has launched a number of strategic funds. I'm just singling out 3, although there are more. Of course, of interest to this talk are mostly the Newton Fund and GCRF, the Global Challenges Research Fund. These are part of the official of the UK's government commitment to official development assistance, in this case for research primarily aimed at benefiting people in middle and low-income countries and meeting sustainable development goals. There's also the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund to really foster the cross-fertilization between academics and industrial partners, to really bring innovation and new products that can really help solve these complex challenges. And then from a more individual award perspective, the Future Leaders Fellowship that also have a very important interest in connecting researchers with within universities with businesses. So these are some key funds. So moving on, after briefly introducing possible funds, how do you go on about choosing a funding stream? Well, first you need to find funding opportunities, and I'm sure your research office regularly sends you updates of what is out there, what funders are looking for at the moment. And I would also advise you to consult these websites here, because they have very good summaries of research opportunities amongst other news that are relevant to research funding and policy. Research Connect requires an institutional membership. The Research Professional News is entirely free and has very good and regularly updated funding, so something to look out for. And of course, our staff newsletter also includes some funding opportunities. And it's also important to consider the funding mode you're applying for. There is, of course, the bread and butter of many funders, so the calls that are put out regularly, they happen frequently. They may have rolling deadlines or fixed deadlines throughout the year. These are essentially research-led, responsive mode ones, so you have a good idea and you think your idea fits within the remit of the funder, you can write a project and really drive your ideas forward. However, funders also frequently launch strategic calls in response to knowledge gaps or research community needs. Those will have a much more, will have a narrower scope, so there will be predefined research areas questions. The terms and conditions will be bespoke. The types of activities that are allowed or encouraged will be different as well. And this happens a lot with GCRF and Newton funding calls. Normally the call guidance is quite prescriptive as to what the kinds of activities you're allowed to use the funds for, and the activities you're not allowed to use the fund for. This tends to be less frequent, and sometimes they have one-off deadlines. So they, you know, a funder may call on a particular topic, let's say nutrition and diabetes, and that's it, and there won't be another topic with such a specific remit in the near future. So that's something to consider as well, that those opportunities, if you have the right research for it, then you can't afford perhaps not to apply. One thing that is important to say, both with strategic calls and responsive mode, is that with the move towards challenge-driven research, the remits of different funders have become a little bit more blurry. So sometimes, you know, the Economic and Social Researches Council will be funding something that you would think is predominantly health related, and that can happen a lot. So if you're unsure about remit, I would advise you to speak to the funders and making sure really your proposal fits their remit. In terms of grant schemes, there's different, they come in different shapes and flavors and sizes. Of course, the ones we're most interested in are the research grants or individual fellowships. These are essentially to conduct research, so they will pay for consumables, and they will pay, the bulk of the funds will be for consumables and for salaries of the staff doing the research. But there are also other grant schemes that aim to promote science in different ways. For example, the partnership grants, institutional links, capacity building grants. The expected outputs from those grants is not so much a research piece, is not so much data, but rather the building of connections, capacity building, or other outcomes that then hopefully will pave the way for research outputs, but not directly. There's also equipment or infrastructure grants. Those are normally more institutional and directed depending on the type of work you want to do. There are also seed funding and pump priming grants. So these are ideal if you have an idea, but you don't have any pilot data. And if a grant like this comes up, it may be really, really useful, even if it's a small pot of money, to get an idea off the ground. And finally, there are, of course, also travel grants that allow exchange of researchers spending time in a different country, for example, learning a new technique. Another thing to consider when applying is your individual eligibility as the researcher. So normally the institutional eligibility is normally sorted, but it's just your eligibility as an individual, and that depends a lot on your career stage. And I would advise you, especially for early career researchers, to consult this interactive tool that's on the MRC website that allows you to see the kinds of awards you should be aiming to apply for depending on your career stage and the aim of your work. And it has the advantage, this site, that you can actually choose by funder. So we'll give you very specific information if, for example, you're a postdoc, what kind of funding you can apply for from different funders. But just going back to early career researchers again, I think it's important to emphasize a few things. There are many funding streams that are appropriate. Of course, individual fellowships are perhaps the most prestigious. This includes UKRI Future Leader Fellowships, Henry Wellcome, etc. But there's also the possibility of being PIs on research grants. For example, the MRC New Investigator grants are specifically devoted for people who are establishing an independent career. They wouldn't get a fellowship, but get a New Investigator grant. You can also be co-investigator on a grant, or you can even be named researcher co-investigator, whereby you can be entirely paid as a staff member, as a postdoc, on a grant, but you can still be named researcher, which is important in terms of future career development. And one thing to consider is if you're not in a position yet, for whatever reason, to apply for your own independent funding, it's important to participate in other people's grants and build your career in that way as well. Something to be aware of is that the definition of early career researcher varies widely. Some funders have limits on the post-PhD period. You can only apply for this particular stream of funding if you've obtained your PhD in the last however many years. Other funders base it on previous grant income, so it doesn't matter how long you've got your PhD since. The important thing is whether you've had a large grant before or not. But lots of these schemes also consider career breaks, so it's important to bear that in mind. It's not entirely straightforward, a date from when your PhD was obtained. And another thing that's very important for early careers when they apply for any opportunity is to make sure they have the right mentorship in place. They have an experienced senior colleague who is able to provide some support on grantsmanship and career development, and that also in most cases that they have institutional support for whatever proposal they put forward. Finally, just a couple of words on remit, scope, and resources. So if you find what you think is a good opportunity to put in a proposal, you still need to see whether really what you're proposing would fulfill the guidance requirements. You would really meet the expectations of the funder. So does your proposal fulfill the core requirements? Are you set out to do what the funder wants you to do? Is your experimental design and methodology appropriate to answer the questions you propose? Does your team have the relevant expertise? Do you have the right partnerships involved? And then also consider whether the work you propose is feasible within the funding limits. Can you realistically deliver the work you're doing? And finally, international development. Bear in mind also the eligibility of countries. For GCRF is all low and middle income countries, although there are currently exceptions and funding caps on China and India. And for Newton, there are specific countries that are eligible for specific schemes. So that's something to bear in mind. I won't say much more about this because Claire is going to talk about actual content of applications and do's and don'ts. So I'll just leave it here in this sense and move on to funding opportunities related to COVID-19 related research. As Sharon said, COVID-19 has had a huge knock-on effect on research funding, both with some charities being in dire financial circumstances and pulling out funding, people who have existing or ongoing awards having to stop their research and put together a contingency plan. So there's a lot going on there. But for now, I just wanted to focus on opportunities for COVID-19 related research that have emerged recently. So the first thing to bear in mind is that most funding opportunities on COVID-19 research are aligned with the priorities that were set out by the World Health Organization to contribute to control the outbreak. These are listed here. There's 9 of them. Most of them are understandably very medical, understanding the virus, understanding the transmission of zoonotic diseases, epidemiological studies, of course, clinical manages, vaccines, infection control, therapeutics, etc. And also there is also a highlight for the economic and social sciences. So these are the key areas that WHO has identified thus far. Although this is a very dynamic field, and this document gets updated regularly, so that's something to bear in mind. The ones I have here are from the March 2020 document. So a lot of funders have launched rapid response calls, and I guess these are welcome in the sense that they perhaps are less cumbersome from a perspective, from an administrative and bureaucratic perspective, and allow starting work quickly. However, these have very, very specific limits. So in general, UKRI rapid response calls are for research with clear impact pathways that is expected to deliver within the period of the award. And we're talking about 18 months award. So it's quite a big ask, and that's something that will be very important to highlight. It will, such research can support the manufacture or adoption of an intervention, so the much needed treatment, cure, or prevention, and any data or resources needs to be shared with the wider research community. There's a number of schemes. I would like to highlight 3. UKRI is actively encouraging current award holders to switch standard grants to COVID-19 opportunities, and UKRI says this is the quickest way to start work. So the research will need to consult with UKRI, but this would be a way. This would be a way to start working in this field quickly. Of course, the researchers will need to weigh the pros and cons of doing so, and the effect that will have on the initial plans for whatever study that was initially funded. UKRI has also launched a call up to 18 months, no funding cap, on UK-focused ideas to address COVID-19. And just last week, GCRF and Newton also launched an agile fund for research focused on low and middle income countries, again, up to 18 months. So the remit is broadly the same, but these are different options depending on whether you already hold an award, whether your work is UK focused or focused on an LMIC. Sorry, this slide is rather busy, but I think these are important things to highlight. NIHR is also working on COVID rapid response initiatives, and these have a rolling deadline, so they clearly want people to apply, come up with ideas, apply quickly, and be able to start their work quickly. They have a specific highlight notice that one closes on the 1st of June on understanding transmission, especially the role of children in transmission, and also a focus on priority groups, transmission risk factors, and seroprevalence. There's also a pre-announced of a joint call from UKRI and DFID. There's not many details known, but it is expected that these will be largely aligned with the WHO health priorities. So again, a very, very strong health focus. I would also like to highlight, for example, that the BIHF is funding work on COVID that specifically tries to understand the effects of COVID in the cardiovascular system and why people with cardiovascular disease are at risk. And of course, I couldn't list every single funding call, but there is a number of these, especially promoted by disease-based charities, on understanding the effect of COVID and multimorbidities in people that suffer from particular diseases. Moving a little bit outside the health sphere, there are other grants. For example, the British Academy has special research grants in the humanities and social sciences. These are relatively small, but postdoctoral researchers are available, so this could be something of interest to early career researchers. AHRC is also running an urgency grants pilot for 12 months. The Arts and Humanities Research Council is actually promoting a very interesting call where they will matchmake AHRC funded researchers with filmmakers to increase public engagement and bring people awareness of ongoing research. So this is not specifically related to COVID-19, but I guess AHRC saw an opportunity there, considering that lots of researchers are in quarantine. NERC, so the Environment Research Council, has also small grants up to 65K to allow for urgent data collection and initial analysis. So as long as this follows broadly within the environmental space. The Innovations for Poverty Action, Peace and Recovery program have an interesting funding scheme that is not for new research, but it's additions to ongoing research. So if you have an ongoing project where you think the COVID angle is important, but you don't have money to fund the COVID angle, you can ask for additional funds to do this. And for example, the Newton Fund has an institutional links call, so not so much a research per se, but it's about research capacity in a variety of areas that are priority areas for Indonesia and generally in international development, but that have a COVID-19 slant, and how COVID-19, for example, is affecting malnutrition and stunting is one of the topics. If you want to know more about current projects that are being funded, UKCDR has put together a very interesting tracker where you can find a lot of resources. You can sort them by the priority, the WHO priority research area. If you're interested in knowing, for example, what is being done in vaccines, you can filter for those. You can select by country. This could be a very good way of even finding partners in different countries. If you're looking to team up with a partner in another country, you can sort out by funder, etc. So this is a very important tool in that sense. And of course, if you obtain funding for any project that's COVID related, you're invited to add your project to this database. So just some considerations if you do decide to apply for COVID-19 related applications. Consider the alignment with WHO priorities. Lots of funders ask specifically which WHO priority and sub-priority is your work aligned with. Not all funders, but some do. Consider it in the context of ongoing research, and the tool I've just mentioned would be very useful for that. And in many cases, funders ask you to justify the urgency. Is this something that needs to be done now? What is the missed opportunity if it's not done now? So that's something that's really important to consider. Another thing is, because these are fast turnaround grants, it's also expected that there is some kind of visible impact during the duration of the award. So are your plans likely to generate a tangible output that meets the funders' expectations that there is a contribution towards a better management of the condition? And also, it's important that, because many funders require that data and tools are made available, that you highlight how you're going to do so and how really the wider research community can benefit from your research. Finally, some considerations on feasibility. Can you do the work while social distancing measures are in place? Have you catered for the safety of the researchers and participants? If you're doing international work, do your local partners have the capacity to lead on the work on the field if you are unable to travel? And very importantly, whether there is ethical compliance with your project, and a very important guidance and framework is provided by recent report from the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. Another very important thing to consider is that many funders expect that work starts very soon after the outcome is known. The outcome from any proposal is going to be known quickly. So it's important when you put in an application to consider well whether your team and your research office is ready to start promptly. To start the work promptly. So you may need to, you may be tempted to submit sooner rather than later, but that's something to bear in mind, that timing. And if you don't fulfill these specific requirements, although your project is related to COVID-19, you may want to consider applying in response mode for a longer term project with a longer duration, or you may even, there might be other opportunities, I'm sure, for projects. They're not so much on the urgency side of things, but more continued programs of research. So that's something to bear in mind as well. And finally, just one more slide. I just wanted to go back a little bit to my previous proposal and say how QMUL researchers can engage with LIDC for the preparation of research proposals. So a big part of our remit is to promote interdisciplinary research proposals. My job is to identify funding opportunities. They have to be relevant to our strategy, i.e. they have to be relevant to international development, challenge-driven and interdisciplinary. I will then build on our network, on our huge networks of national and international members to foster research partnerships, both with academics and NGOs. And I'll do so by potentially reaching out to colleagues in research offices and say, you know, I have someone very interested in a particular area, and we need, let's say, a social scientist with an interest in that particular area. So I liaise with my colleagues in research offices to try to do this matchmaking, because any proposal submitted by LIDC needs to have participation from at least 2 of our member colleges. That is our mandate. As part of my job, I also develop communities of practice that may pave the way for the preparation of bids, and I've highlighted an example of the work we've done in education in emergencies. And finally, myself and our director, Claire, assist with application, the preparation of the application and the application writing. So please do reach out to me if you're interested in working with LIDC and join us as a member. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. That was really interesting. If you have a question, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself and then ask your question to Anna. Okay, we have a question from Fabian. Hi, Fabian.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hello there. So,
Hi.
you actually referring to the responsive mode grants?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering that because for a long time I'm seeking to submit like an EPSRC type grant for GCRF.
Mm-hmm.
And is it like an ongoing type of grant using EPSRC for GCRF that we can submit this like a responsive or is it still a kind of in a special remit, and where I can find this type of opportunities?
So I think the first step would go to the EPSRC website and look really into their remit and see if their response mode funding would be appropriate for the type of research you are proposing. If you're unsure, because sometimes it may not be completely clear, what I would advise is that you write a brief outline of your proposal. Say what you intend to do, what your expected outputs are, perhaps an indicative costs, who is in your research team, just literally a one-pager, something very brief and summarized, and ask the EPSRC program managers what the best route for funding is. Sometimes there will be specific GCRF grants, but as I said, they will have a very specific remit, and it's important that you don't just shoehorn something that you can be vaguely related. It's important that it really matches the call guidance and the criteria. So my first advice would be to go straight to EPSRC, go to their website, put that one pager and contact the program manager at EPSRC. They may be able even to send you to calls from a different council. If they have some specific GCRF call on the pipeline that might be appropriate, they may even be able to advise you on that too.
Right. Is there any kind of a page that you can find all of these responsive mode grants from any funder? Is it kind of a source that we can find all of this information?
For responsive mode, I don't think so, actually, because the specific strategic calls are advertised and announced. The responsive modes, because it's bread and butter, I haven't come across a page that has all of those. I think you will need to know roughly which councils work in your area, knowing that it's very highly interdisciplinary. Some work is very interdisciplinary, but you clearly are in the EPSRC remit. So I would go to the EPSRC website, and they will tell you what, and they will tell you how many deadlines a year they have, if it's a rolling deadline, and give you other guidance. This is as far as I'm aware, but maybe colleagues can correct me.
Okay, thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Kamyar. The next question is from Fabian.
Yes, hello, thank you very much for your presentation. But I think my question is a bit more on the practical side.
Sure.
I'm interested in setting up a project on this COVID-19, as given the shift in the allocation of funding. However, I guess the access to biological samples is restricted. So who can I contact with in my organization to inquire about the access to samples? And also, you mentioned in one of your slides considering safety of researchers. So for someone that has no experience working with virus samples, is there any kind of training available to start projects like this?
I think those questions will be better addressed by people in QMUL research office. I'm not entirely sure about your internal processes. I imagine, you know, if you want to find out about such rules, the NIHR website may be a good source, as there will be, you know, well implemented protocols depending on how dangerous the virus is when you work with it, and surely the labs at QMUL will also have different containment levels that can cater for how dangerous the organisms you're handling are, but I will leave that to the QMUL colleagues to advise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fabian. Any other questions for Anna?
There's Sandra Jumbe.
Yes, hi Anna, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, hi.
I had a few questions, but now I think they've been kind of answered by everyone else. Just a few, I think, points of clarity for me.
Sure.
I think somewhere in your presentation, you mentioned that the SDGs have ambitious targets. I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. So basically, I applied previously for a GCRF grant, and I think because it was quite interdisciplinary, sort of mental health education, so it touched on quite a lot of areas. So we had about, I think, 2 or 3 of those, and I just remembered one of the even though we got to the final stage, one of the comments was that they were unsure of whether we could realistically achieve the impact that we had set out. So is that what you are maybe touching on?
No, I was purely touching on the SDGs regardless of research. You know,
Okay.
I was thinking of how close we are to meet the targets, because as you know, there are quantitative metrics as to what should we achieve, you know, how many children should be in education, how many children should be out of poverty, etc. And I think we're lagging behind on those, I think it's fair to say. But my comment wasn't about research. I mean, if you want to read the Bill Gates, the Gates Foundation Goalkeepers Report, it's a yearly report that checks the status of the SDGs and how far we are from reaching them. But that's regardless of research.
Okay.
In terms of your application not delivering impact, so being unlikely to deliver impact, I mean, I can't comment. I'm not a peer-reviewed or an expert in the area, but I would imagine perhaps the plans didn't look sufficiently feasible, or perhaps, you know, the ambition was a little bit overstated, but I don't know. I mean, this is just a guess. What might be useful is if you want to know more details, I don't know if you can contact the program manager and try to obtain more detailed feedback. That might be an option.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have one last question from John before we move on. John, can you please present yourself and ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for your presentation, Anna. That was really informative. I'm a research development manager at QMUL, by way of introduction. My question is about the opportunity to switch existing UKRI funding to COVID-19 focused research. Do you know whether or not there's any kind of inbuilt incentive to do that in that scheme? Because I was just wondering, you know, why a researcher might be motivated to do that, given how much work, as you know, will have gone into their original application. So I was just wondering whether or not there's, as I say, any sort of inbuilt incentive to do that.
as far as I know, no. I think the approach is when you apply for new funding, you have to justify why your existing funding wouldn't fulfill the same need, especially when you apply for new funding and you're looking into apply for new funding that you're gonna tag along an existing grant. I think you'll need to make a strong case, but I'm not sure there are any provisions to say, okay, once the crisis is over, you'll get additional funding so you can finish up what you initially set out to do. I don't know if that's the case. There's talk of no cost extensions. At the moment at LIDC, we have a proposal that was approved. The start date keeps being pushed back, but at some point we were told you have to start on this specific date, and then you can it's pretty much guaranteed you'll get a no cost extension, which of course brings a problem in terms of staff pay, because if staff starts getting paid, then you can still do activities, but their salary will be over. So that's a slight problem there. I think researchers can, if they really don't feel that their existing award can be repurposed, and that
Right.
would completely undermine everything they're doing. I think that they can make a very strong case when they apply for additional for the additional funding, as opposed to repurposing.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll now move on to Claire for her presentation. Sharon already presented Claire in the introduction. Claire, are you ready?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much. I apologize, I was a bit late to this meeting, but let me see if I can share my screen. All right. Okay. All right, so what I want to do today is take you through what a panel might see from proposal writing. How is the panel going to view, what are the different kind of elements of a proposal? And I'll try to touch on COVID, because COVID brings a whole nother dimension to this. And I think I wanted to start with the three big ones that seem blindingly obvious, but often aren't. And the first one, when you're writing your proposal, is, oh dear, let me see if I can get this to play. You know, the first one is a very, very basic, know your problem. And it's unbelievable how many absolutely beautifully written proposals I've seen that clearly don't account for, say, 20 years of research in the global development space that's been done on that topic. So, and this is particularly important in interdisciplinary proposals. You may have, you may come from a different perspective, and your perspective, you know, problem A may be a huge problem, but in other fields it might not be. And in global development, it might not be again. So you want to make sure that there's a demonstrable impact on vulnerable populations. And again, this really plays into what's happening on COVID. The COVID, there is a lot of COVID funding for overseas in development. We'll start seeing that come through. But again, you have to put that in the context that's been very well researched already. A lot of proposals sort of shoehorn an idea to fit ODA criteria. And panels really react about that. They can see these retrofits immediately. And of course, you just want to build on your evidence base. You know, there's few areas of global development that haven't been researched. So make sure your proposal acknowledges this and builds on what's going on in the field in your target level. Now, the other one is, of course, demand. All right, the other side of this is like strong proposals demonstrate the countries and communities who will be impacted by the research need, want, or desire these outputs. And I know that, again, that seems really obvious, but it's amazing how often people forget to include sort of the perspective of the beneficiaries. And Anna touched upon my next point, which my next really big point was about project partners. You know, the track record of your partners really matter. You want to demonstrate that you have an existing relationship with your partners, and that can often be very difficult in the early stages of your career. So my last point is absolutely vitally important: equity. You know, people will put in proposals, or teams will put in proposals where most of the money is locked into the institution in the global north, and the southern partners are kind of add-ons or afterthoughts. Panels really react quite strongly to this, so be very, very careful. Demonstrate equity. It's good practice in research. You should be doing this. It should be an equal and level playing field. Now, interdisciplinarity. I mean, we talk about interdisciplinarity like it's, you know, a very new thing. Of course, it's not. I mean, when we can see, you know, way back down to Margaret Mead in 1955 was talking about interdisciplinary studies. And if you ever get a chance to look up some of these early papers, they're absolutely fascinating. But what that has led to today is this huge sort of interest in all elements of how we combine knowledge forms. So, you know, in the 1990s, we talk about multidisciplinary studies. This moved in the 2000s. We talked about transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary. We're talking about metadisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, antidisciplinary, infradisciplinary. I mean, it's just created this huge kind of a new discourse about interdisciplinarity. You need to draw on that in your proposals. So what is it? You know, this is a very well accepted definition: process of answering or solving a problem that's too broad or complex to be dealt with adequately by a single discipline. And here's the really critical point: it integrates disciplinary insights through the construction of a comprehensive perspective. And it's that piece that you want to demonstrate in your proposals. So what are the benefits? Well, you know, there's a lot about how it unpacks complexity. There's a lot about in the literature about how interdisciplinary research fosters or sparks innovation. I think that's actually a much harder thing to prove. But it's widely considered that it's a beneficial way to do research. Now, from a panel perspective, panels look for disciplinary fit in terms of interdisciplinarity. They look for, is this range of disciplines the right range that you'll need to answer the research question? And have they been allotted the correct proportion of time? Are they going to be allowed to kind of, so again, it's all back to integration. In any interdisciplinary research proposal that you put in, you really, really, really want to spend time, and with these word limits, it's a very hard thing, to demonstrating that these are the right disciplines at the right time in the right place. So the other thing is, sometimes at the very end, you'll be on panels and at the very end of the process, they'll rank proposals by the level of interdisciplinarity. So that's important to remember, that this could be a ranking criteria. The other element is that wild interdisciplinarity, where you're connecting sort of two disciplines, like sort of art, you know, artists with, you know, medical science or with bioscience. And it's like, yes, that's a great thing. Wild disciplinarity, in my opinion, is harder to justify. It's easy to make it look quite gimmicky. So be very careful about that. It's not that the work wouldn't be interesting, but you have to make sure that it's not perceived by a panel as being a bit of a gimmick. And now this is the piece that I really want to kind of, you know, even very experienced researchers make mistakes about the pathways to impact. And it's a really easy thing to kind of get it wrong. So the approaches that you'll use, you know, what it is to get your outputs adopted by users. And what it's not, it is not a list of methods that you're going to use at the community level or with your stakeholders. It is not methods. It's approaches to get your outputs adopted. And that's a really, really critical point. And what happens is, if there's two proposals that are very close and they're ranked the same, the panel will look to the pathways to impact. Who has a stronger pathways to impact? So it's a very, very critical piece of any proposal. Now, budgets. This is my personal kind of bugbear about budgets. You know, be very specific about your budgets. Don't guesstimate. People, you know, you will be, you know, likely faced with a panel who, you know, the person's just come back from a flight to, say, you know, X, and they'll know exactly how much that flight costs. They'll know exactly how much it costs to stay in a hotel. They'll know exactly how much in your area of field where you want to be in this for this project, how much a hotel might cost. So don't underestimate the extreme experience of your panel in understanding budgets and how expensive. And don't guesstimate. When I say budgets, when they're just all zeros and they haven't, and the research has made no attempt to get an accurate accounting for how much that's going to cost, that definitely scores against you. So be careful on your budgets, put time into understanding the cost, let your partners lead you on this. So I'm going to end. I didn't have a lot to kind of talk to you today, but I've got two big kind of endings. One was what a good interdisciplinary proposal looks like. And, you know, the best proposals, interdisciplinarity wasn't questioned. You know, there was a very strong evidence and deep expertise across the national and social scientists. The teams had developed a body of work together. You know, the research, having strong partnerships, the research councils have given a lot of money to develop network grants in particular. It's like, use these grants. They're great stepping stones to the next step. Acknowledge risk. Proposals that tend to skip over risk tend to score quite badly. It's much better to front up what the problems that you might encounter and put in mitigation. So this panel has an understanding that you understand mitigation, you understand the potential risks, and you can address those risks. And this is really important when we're talking about COVID research and virtual research. And again, the pathways to impact. You want clearly identified tools to reach a very specific audience. You want to demonstrate that you'll have that impact. And again, I think that was one of the questions from last session. You know, you have to be quite careful. You know, you don't want to sort of overestimate what that impact would be. It's a very fine line, because equally you don't want to underestimate what your impact is going to be. So it's a very difficult thing to get right, and that's something that you might want to take advice from more senior academics from, and certainly LIDC will be happy to help you with these kinds of issues. So finally, what are the sort of really broad factors of failure? I think the really big piece is not to frame your problem within existing evidence, and it happens over and over again. Or they're focusing on a problem that's very important to the wrong group. You know, it's not relevant to your end user. Equity and fairness. Do not put it in a proposal where your partners are viewed or may be viewed as just sort of add-ons, and the same goes for disciplines. You know, interdisciplinarity, you need to justify that the disciplines that are going to be there. Don't try to include everything in the kitchen sink and disciplines that don't have a real role, who may not be able to get you to your impact. And I think, so finally, you know, who is this mythical panel? Who are the people that are going to read your proposal? And on any proposal, and depending, could be a very big panel, you could get up to 7 people reading your proposal. So you might have 3 reviewers, you might have 2 reviewers. 2 will have very deep expertise. You may have 2 panel members, once it goes to panel, that review your proposal, and there may be 2 chairs, so they will also review your proposal. You know, you will have people that are experts in your field, and you have people that aren't experts in your field. So it's really important to display your expertise in an accessible manner. You know, you don't want to dumb this down. This is your work. You want to show that you know. But equally, you want to avoid acronyms and jargon. There's nothing more annoying than when you're reading a proposal and you have to go look up every other word, because it's an acronym that's very well known in a specific field, but it isn't one that's well known, that may be not well known to your panel members. So that's something to be really careful about. And I think that is what I wanted to end on. Let me see if I can get myself back up. And let me see. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. I'm trying to get my, I can't find where I'm lost my, All right, but does anybody have any questions? That was a very quick run through, and we can talk about sort of specific things when I think about COVID grants, if anybody's interested in that.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please do raise your hands. John, you look like you might have a question.
I do. Yeah, my question is about interdisciplinarity. In the eyes of panels, do you find that interdisciplinarity necessarily means that researchers that are based in different disciplines have to be involved, or can it simply mean a researcher or a team of researchers within one particular discipline incorporating methods, approaches, perspectives that are more commonly associated with another discipline?
That's a really great question. It kind of depends on your experience and the level of grant that you're applying for. In smaller grants, panels are less risk averse. So they may see that as, okay, this is really interesting. This team will be able to develop capacity in this. So, you know, that's fine. In big grants, absolutely no, that's not the way forward. In big grants, bring in the expertise that's required and show that they will be kind of fair and equal partners in how to demonstrate this. So there's no, and the risk becomes, you know, by doing that is you're making something very multidisciplinary. And you have to show that these methods are going to produce interdisciplinary outputs.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Please do raise your hands.
I have a question for Claire Gunn.
Sure.
Claire, I was wondering, in the face of COVID-19, the actual research delivery has changed a lot, as you know. And I was thinking if you could share your thoughts for researchers in low and middle income countries that have partnerships with UK countries, sometimes in projects that are led by PIs in the UK. So how does the transfer of ownership happen in terms of now you drive the work because I can't even get to the field? And how do you deal in the cases where there's no sufficient capacity in the country?
I think
existing capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a really critical issue in terms of COVID-19 research, and I think it'll stop a lot of good research from going forward because it'll be seen as very, very risky without an ability, the standard kind of way to monitor and manage risk. So in these kinds of cases, it's really critical that the kind of monitoring and evaluation and risk element of a proposal is really detailed well. Because otherwise, I think it will be seen as very risky, and it won't be seen as. But you know, obviously, there's some unbelievably, you know, strong scientific partners out there, and then you know the risk is less. Panel members will know some of these teams; they'll be very aware of their expertise, and that they are very confident that they can carry on with the work. So, and this all comes back to sort of know your partners, and you know, ensure that your partners are. You know, equitable and fair and what's going to happen. But yeah, COVID brings a whole variety of different risks. How do you manage a research project virtually? When do you start activities? When is it going to be safe? How can you acknowledge these risks within a proposal? And you have to, because these will come up. So it's really important, I think, at the writing stage to think about these issues. So thanks, Anna.
Is there any other questions?
Yes, hi, hello. Hello.
Hello?
Yes, hi, can you hear me? I have a question. My name is Joanna and I work at physics department. And thank you for the useful advices about the information. That was interesting for me. And I would like to ask, what is the rating of the successful grant application? Like how big percentage of the grants actually you are funding?
We, in terms of, we're not a funder at LIDC, but in terms of the kind of, that differs by the Research Council. It differs by the call.
Mhm.
It differs by, yeah, virtually every single call will have a different kind of percentage of success. So it's kind of hard to say, but I think that there are, one of the things that I think is that you might want to consider, there's also strategies around putting these grants in. You know, if you're aware of an area working, of people who work in your area, these very strong big teams that might be in country X, you know, do you think your research would have a better chance in country Y? Well, it might do. So there are sort of strategic elements about that, but it's actually quite hard to say about percentages because all the calls are different and the percentages of success. I mean, some of the panels that I've been on have had really high levels of success because researchers didn't really put that many proposals in. Other panels, there's, you know, everybody has put in a proposal for it. So the level of successes is extremely low or vanishingly small. So it really depends on the call.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
But my recommendation is when people are starting out in early career is go for these network grants. They're great. They allow you to establish partnerships. Their proposals are often less onerous. They're a great way to then have something to build on. It gives you great insight, you know, what your partners will say at some of these networking meetings. There's quite a few networking grants out there on COVID, and I would strongly recommend that people look into these because they're really a good way to start your career and get on the ladder.
I have a question, if I may. So how much on the impact, not related to COVID, but how much on the impact has to be on, for example, on the, if we are in the UK, on the UK, because I find that a lot of times, obviously the impact is much relevant in one of the countries or teams that you're collaborating. We have the expertise here, but the impact, it's easier to explain on the country like, you know, Middle East. We do a lot of things with South America, whereas the impact here, it seems sometimes it's more intellectual. And I don't know if that sells very well. There's a change of balancing the benefits in each country. You could advise on that, or this is the reality how it is?
I think that you have to, I mean, you know, if you have a problem where the impact in the global north is big and the impact in the global south is less, but it's still there, then your funding streams should be more kind of global north based. These, you know, there's a lot of like, it wouldn't be relevant to the GCRF. The GCRF is really interested in kind of global south impacts. You know, can we build capacity? There's another underlying thing of the GCRF. Can we build capacity in these countries in terms of research? So that is, you know, that's a really good point because it's one of these things that, particularly around COVID, you have to be very careful of. You know, are we looking at a problem as a problem here, but it won't necessarily, we don't know if it's a problem there.
Thank you.
Okay, we also have a question from Sandra.
Hi Claire, thank you for your talk. My question's to do with how funding panels and reviewers within this area view patient and public involvement. So just from my experience, for example, with NIHR, they pretty much want you to have that embedded within your proposal already, have to show at least that you've done something or are planning to. So is it similar, for example, with GCRF type funding?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just thinking of the logistics of doing that if you're here to start with, and then yeah.
Yeah, no, in terms of COVID, it's very difficult. In terms of standard sort of ODA research, yeah, you want to demonstrate that, and you want to, it's really demonstrating demand. You know, do these communities need, want, or desire this research? So sometimes it doesn't have to be direct, but it has to meet a need. And that need, it's much stronger proposals when that need is expressed by the community that you're saying will benefit from your research. So again, it's very difficult in COVID in this environment to show that. But there are still, certainly in the health space, there is still things are happening. Community health workers are moving into these communities, particularly in India. You know, there is still in the global south levels of integration, and there's still people moving within these communities. You may be able to get that. That would definitely strengthen a proposal on COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we will now get to Luke, who has the last presentation.
One second, just starting up. Hi everyone. As introduced by Sharon at the beginning, my name is Luke Quidland. I work as an impact engagement officer at Queen Mary University, and my part of this presentation is to talk about impact and specifically scaling up impact. So if you bear with me 1 second, I'll share my slides. Okay, so yes, as previously discussed, this whole seminar is about funding, writing, and impact. And as I previously mentioned, my section will be about scaling up impact specifically. So I first thought it'd be good to go about actually defining impact, because there's a one, it's a word that's used a lot, but also two, there's variances between different institutions and what they actually describe as impact, but there are common threads, and therefore, just for clarity's sake, I thought I'd start out just defining using a couple of those definitions. So first off is REF 2021. Theirs specifically refers to effects, changes, and benefits that can occur in multiple different areas within society. So that can be society itself, economy, culture, services, health, environment. The UKRI's description of impact is slightly different, but again, it's going back to the contribution and demonstrability. Claire was talking about demonstrating impact previously, and the ability to demonstrate change is probably one of the biggest elements of impact, full stop. And then you have Horizons 2020 definition of impact, and that takes more along the lines of commercial purposes and policy making, and ensuring that basically the expenditure that is coming from EU citizens is for EU citizens themselves. So the key kind of takeaway from all of these, and there are other definitions as well, is demonstrable change for the good, for a society, for a culture, for a community. So then you now have to kind of think about impact in terms of your funding applications. Now, Claire was referring to Pathways to Impact a second ago. In the UK, Pathways to Impact is now not officially a statement, or at least should I say the Pathways to Impact statement is no longer available within these applications. But the core message still is that impact is still being retained in your application processes and your bids. It's just the fact that the Pathways to Impact statement is no longer the specific means of which you implement that impact. It differs between the research councils and what their statements are being put out about this, but I should also point out that this was made, excuse me, officially made in mid-March. And obviously with regards to COVID-19, things have escalated quite significantly. So this has obviously not been 100% on the forefront of the research council's forefront. So if you look at the different impacts guidance, these research councils, some will still talk about pathways to impact, but most of them at least will refer to the fact that it's no more, the statement is no more in play, and it now has to be implemented in different ways within your application bid. So yes, the two key things to think about here is that yes, they're still keeping impact. However, there'll be less space for it as it doesn't have its own specific section. And that now has to be incorporated into the case for support. So there's the case for support section within your application bids. That is now where impact is expected to be implemented. And as stated, there's previously a lot more space for this. So you now have to be completely honed in what you actually specifically plan to do, how you're going to do it, who your partners will be, and in the most concrete and concise way as possible. Likewise, if there's any cost incurring activities that will occur from your pathways to impact, then you need to now be including that in the justifications for resources statement. And also before I go specifically into impact and scaling up, just specifically referring to how we've been talking about LIDC and GCRF, whereas obviously impact can be a broad thing as well. So I just wanted to state that obviously, well, I'm going to be giving some examples later, and some of them may be perceived as slightly less within the remit of LIDC and GCRF. For the most part, they are. And it's also a key thing to note that impact is specifically a global endeavor for the most part in terms of what these UKRI, REF are looking for. So just to clarify that in terms of what impact is a global initiative, and GCRF and LIDC fall under that as well. So as I say, scaling up impact. So the first thing I should refer to is how kind of impact is measured. And it's kind of measured in two ways. So it's measured in significance. So that can is as you'd expect it to be. So how important is this research and the impact that's coming from it? What is the significance to individuals, communities, etc. But the other one is reach, and reach can kind of be presumed to be perceived as just a geographical thing, as in how can you scale this up country by country. But it also should be noted that reach is also to do with difficult to reach demographics, difficult to reach communities. We have one such impact area of research where it's very, very local in the UK, but it's to do with local vulnerable children, looked after children, who are very difficult to, in a research capacity, find out and try and help their circumstances. So reach can be very local geographically, but the reach can be very significant in terms of how you're getting to those people might be very difficult. And that applies in LIDC and it applies to GCRF as well. These are communities around the world who usually or could be perceived as difficult to reach. And if you can show that very clearly in your application bid that you are finding ways in which you will be able to benefit that community and it's perceivable through the partners in that community itself, then as Claire mentioned, then that'll go a really long way in terms of benefiting you with your application process. So yeah, it also, when referring to reach, you should keep an open mind as well when it comes to where your impact how it could manifest. You make your research maybe going smoothly in one area, and the impact maybe you would have thought, and it's gone well in one such space, but then you also have the ability to then think where else could it may be successful on top of the areas you're looking at. So you may, again, if we were to look at from one country to the next, how's that going to be, how's the impact going to be realized in one country but not in, and potentially another? So similarity is obviously key. So the things that you would know would be beneficial to replicate, but variables are probably even more so, just as research is. So if there's differences there, you want to be ensuring that you are 100% knowledgeable of those differences and how your activities for planning impact and for actualizing impact are actually dealt with to cater for those variables. So I'm now going to go over a couple of examples of scaling up impact within Queen Mary does of research, and hopefully that'll give you kind of an idea of what I'm referring to in this instance. So the first one is how scaling up of hepatitis C management in the UK. So the background is, in terms of the research, there was work done at Queen Mary on the genotype 3 HCV. And this was done specifically because the other two genotypes became, at that point, main areas of research being conducted in hepatitis. The work done at Queen Mary recognized that actually there was a high prevalence of infection and cirrhosis in immigrants in the UK, and showed that the genotype 3 was actually a more aggressive strain of the virus. This is information that wasn't known before previously, and therefore gave the researchers the ability to focus their attentions and therefore tackle hepatitis C in a different way than it had done previously. As I say here, that then resulted in bespoke successful treatment trials after this identification occurred. And that led to 16% and 53% fall in deaths and transplant listings for HCV respectively last year. World Health Organization has been set target for 2030 to eliminate hepatitis C. And with these kind of figures that have come out of play through the work done at Queen Mary, the global eradication of hepatitis C is on the cards and potentially feasible by 2030. So yeah, just as you can see here, there's a few kind of, I've done a small little diagram, and that just kind of shows you where the kind of logical steps that kind of come with a change and resulting in significant impact. So as you can see, in terms of like medical practice, there was a change in terms of they shift gear in the type of genotype they're focusing on the hepatitis virus. And therefore that changed, turned into a change in practice, a medical practice, in terms of what their research was. Once those trials were rolled out and they showed significant changes for the better, there was an improvement in health outcomes. And then of course, after that then obviously those trials are then evidence then be taken forward elsewhere. So therefore a change in policy and guidelines. And then it manifested itself, and as it stands now, in that there are European guidelines that have changed because of the work done at Queen Mary. There are North American guidelines that have changed, but also in the low and middle income countries around the world, there are also changes now under play as well. Pakistan is now our researchers are now working with a charity in Pakistan to help eradicate it there, and likewise working with prevailers in Brazil in order to try and get rid of the disease there as well through doing bespoke treatments for them where the disease is endemic. So again, kind of riffing off of what Claire was talking about before, is again, it's knowing those partners and where to go. So you may, that's a form of scaling up. So in this instance here, the research began in the UK, was very successful. And then the thought process of, well, how else can we then take this forward? Of course, the research is great, but then equally the implementation requires the coordination and the acceptance and the collaboration of other countries, and they need to be done both prior to the work going there, but also logistically when it's in place at the time, making sure communication lines are always up, and ensuring that the implementation of this new hepatitis C management in this case is done successfully. And yeah, so if you can, of course, when you're mapping out this impact, when you're looking to give your grant applications in, you could never predict all of this to occur and all of this to be successful. But in terms of once trials are starting to come in, and that's when you're looking to show what your impact will be, is the case again, as I said, ensuring that you're not too overly optimistic, but also you don't undersell yourself either, and ensure that those particular pathways of impact are very evident to the panel members looking at your application. The second example I'm going to use scaling up interventions for refugee children. So Queen Mary research has developed, and this is quite recent research, so it started in 2017, a psychology intervention called Trends for the Journey. And it was designed to improve the mental well-being and resilience in children living in refugee camps. Specifically, the refugee camps I'm referring to are in Greece, and these are for Syrian refugees and children specifically. And the researchers in question at Queen Mary started out as working at these refugee camps before they even were working at Queen Mary. And this is a case of, again, the partnerships and the collaboration started to come into play from early on. They started running trials of this intervention in these Greek refugee camps, and they led to improvements in well-being, self-esteem, optimism, and depressive symptoms for these children compared to control groups. And then, as again, showing this diagram as a kind of indicative of how you can go from step to step, scaling up your impact. There's a change of practice in terms of there's a new psychology intervention that had been developed and successfully implemented. And that was shown through the fact there was proven improvement in mental health outcomes for these refugee children. This then resulted in change in training and support outside of the QM remit, for people there in those refugee camps themselves. And this then resulted in the scaling up we were referring to previously. So there's now 3 refugee camps in Greece that use this intervention. There's 2 NGOs multiple schools in Levos in Greece use it, and each summer there's been intentions to go back, train more, so it can almost exponentially grow based on the training that's going on, whilst also delivering the intervention. Of course, this year, for going each summer, the research staff has been able to go, but of course, COVID has played a massive factor in kind of impeding the growth of this intervention, but the principles still remain the same and the work is still being carried out as we speak. So this kind of goes into my next part of my talk, is more to do with redirecting impact goals. So whereas before, scaling up is kind of more of a linear way of going about your work, redirecting impact goals are more based around what, if things aren't going 100% plan, how could you go about changing things potentially? So repurposing your impact. Again, it is the same similar mindset in terms of you want to ensure that when you're going about planning your impact, you are flexible, and you also have a broad mind in terms of where you think things could go, also be very open to the fact that things may not go completely to plan. So, but that also requires a bit of optimism. So if your impact has been focused in one area but it's been unsuccessful, that's not to say it can't be successful elsewhere. There could be other things you may not have looked into. There may be other areas that may be more specific to what you're looking for. Equally, there could be things that you weren't even necessarily planning to go about, and they just kind of naturally occur, and you just have to be there to capitalize on that and ensure that the impact then follows through once it does. So as I say, research can sometimes lead to unexpected impact. That's not something to shy away from if that is positive. It can be either non-linear, so there can be a stop-start element to your research to then the impact. There can be lag, there could be hitches. Sometimes it can be indirect. Other people could take up your work that you didn't necessarily, you may not have made that the connection, but they may have made the connection for you in terms of building those collaborations, relationships, and then if that's the case, then running with it effectively. So the example I'm going to give here is probably, and compared to my other two, definitely at least, is slightly less orientated around LIDC, but I feel like it's a very good example of this. So as a result, I'm giving it as a framework more than anything else. And this one is in the Institute of Dentistry with regards to repurposing impact goals. So this, in dentistry, there's some research done on X-ray imaging, specifically X-ray microthermography. And that's basically a way of mapping out minerals in biological tissue. And it's done in the Department of Dentistry, but also with the Department of Engineering as well, developing this X-ray machine. In 2001, 2009, there were very significant increases in the quality of these reconstruction mappings of biological tissues, as you can see here. And then this, however, this then resulted in a repurposing of impacts that weren't necessarily expected from the offset. So although the X-ray technology was built and is still used for medical and biological applications, it garnered interest from the discipline of cultural heritage as well. It allowed avenues to be opened up that were unable to be opened up before, in that it allowed for uncovering cultural information that was originally thought lost, so reconstructing ancient scrolls, looking into historical letters that were damaged beyond belief, but therefore using this X-ray machine, being able to reconstruct them and bring out the information that were previously thought lost. They were able to garner interest and awareness amongst the cultural impact world, and therefore were able to repurpose their efforts in order to both cater for that and the biological and medical world as well. And effectively, this can be, and again, this now goes, my final point here on this slide, is applicable in all forms of research, I feel. So that's why, as I say, even though this particular example isn't in the LIDC remit, I believe it is the work itself, something that fits well. And that basically, as I say, is a redirection of impact efforts. Different stakeholders have different needs. And these researchers, as I say, were engineers and dentists. They were able to shift their gears, their way of thinking, and shift their way of work in order to also accommodate what they were doing in biology, but also able to do things within the cultural impact world as well, putting on public engagement events, throwing events from the National Archives, things like that, and engaging with these communities alongside the communities that are engaging in originally. As I say, this is applicable across reach for all researchers really, and that allows for you, if you were able, if the doors open up to you, you weren't originally aware of, being open to that prospect and seeing where it goes in terms of beneficial impact is definitely worthwhile across the sector. And that is the end of my talk. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
Thank you, Luke. So yeah, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or just unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, Luke, it sounds like you answer everybody's questions in your presentation, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you very much. So I think that's us coming to the end of this morning's presentations. I think if there are questions, and I'm sure colleagues would be very happy to pick them up. If you want to add stuff in the chat, I'm sure people can come back to you. I just wanted to thank everybody. I wanted to say great top tips in terms of what funders are thinking about, what the panel's thinking about, and what the opportunities are. So thank you very much, Anna, Claire and Luke. Kind of a virtual thank you very much and a hand clap, which we would have done. I hope that's left you with a strong sense of what the opportunities are out there, how you might be able to access them, and some new knowledge that you can take away and put to your next application. That was going to be it from me, unless there are any last questions before we thank everybody and have a good afternoon. No, the tips are all thanking everybody for some excellent presentations. So
Thank you.
Thank you all. Keep applying. That's I think what we're saying, isn't it? Keep applying. There's good work to be done and money out there. That was me summing up. I think we should end the call now because I think we're slightly over time and I'm sure people are running at different things.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.